Kate Bornstein's a trailblazer. Kate identifies as gender nonconforming and has been explaining what she means by that for years, in the form of plays, performances, books, and even on appearances on television, like The Joan Rivers Show. Kate, who is often referred to as Auntie Kate, makes queerness feel familiar and gives LGBT youth the acceptance and understanding that they need to make their way in this world. Kate makes queerness feel like family for LGBTQ individuals and for everyone else. Please welcome Kate Bornstein to the stage, everybody.
Thank you, Cameron. Thank you so much. We're going to get set up here. Thank you so much for coming. Welcome to this 10th Annual EDGY Conference. I'm not going to use the teleprompter, and I'm not going to have my video up there. I'm too much of a fan of comedy to be able to not pay attention to the fact that that lags about 3 seconds or 3 words behind what I'm saying. So if I do this, and then 3 words later, I do that up there, we're going to kick it a little more old school, and I'm going to just talk from up here. I know I'm going to look like a little tiny little head, but I'll be here for the whole conference. If you want a close-up, I'm here for it. All right. All right, you are here to best figure out how to better serve and help queer youth. Bless your hearts and thank you. It's my honor and great joy to deliver these welcoming remarks, and I hope that what I've got to say will serve you well. I'm Kate Bornstein, and I am not a man. And I am not a woman. I was assigned male at birth back in 1948, and I tried real hard to be a guy. It didn't come natural. I had to watch guys and, say, how do they do that? I could do that, right? I could be a guy, right? And that worked. It worked. It never felt right. I felt like I was pretending all my life, and the only option I had if I wasn't a guy was girl, and ultimately woman. In 1984, I started my gender transition. In 1986, I had genital surgery, and that was the key that unlocked everything, and I was a woman. Oh, seriously, it was a wonderful, wonderful moment. It lasted about 6 months. I didn't know how to be a woman. I used to watch women and figure out how you do that. That sort of a thing. And I felt like I was pretending to be a woman as much as I had been pretending to be a man. Wasn't a man, I wasn't a woman. And in 1989, that left me as nothing. There were no other options. Nothing was what I was. Invisible, inexplicable, and impossible. And since I wasn't a man and I wasn't a woman, I was what's called today non-binary. Back then, that wasn't a word, so I called myself a gender outlaw. I searched for languages and bodies of knowledge that spoke eloquently about nothing. Because I wanted to find out, if I'm nothing, how can I make that work? I found 3 big fields, and I'm going to be referencing them on this morning talk, so I want you to know which talks I'm using, which fields I'm using. Postmodern Theory, which basically means things can have more than one meaning at the same time. For example, that's a floor. Look down, that's a floor. It's also a carpet. It's also part of the ceiling of the basement downstairs. So that's postmodern theory. Tibetan Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, basically says everything is changing all the time. And everything is connected. So pay attention. That's Tibetan Buddhism. And then quantum mechanics, which says something can be a particle and a wave at the same time. And you're like, okay, these are all ways of saying nothing. How do I make that work for gender? That's what I'm going to get into today. 6 months ago, I turned 70. So I am an old fart for sure. Is anyone here older than me? Oh, you are an old fart. Oh, over on this side of the room. Anyone? No, it's you and me. Far out. Remember back when they first discovered gender? Right, we were all sitting around outside the cave. Yeah. Fred went, hey, look. Everybody's either got something hanging down between their legs or they don't. And that was gender. We didn't call it gender back then, we called it sex. I'll get into that a little bit more. That's all in the past, though. I've been living consciously beyond the binary of gender, beyond the either or of gender, for 35 years now. It's a hell of a long time. And it is in the past. And today's conference, today's EDGY conference, is themed Building a Brighter Future. I'm all for it, but what does it mean? Tomorrow there's going to be lollipops, marshmallows, and we're all going to be smiling, and we're going to love each other, and it's a brighter future. I don't think so. I don't think it's going to be anywhere near that. Certainly not in what's left of my life. So what does it mean, building a brighter future? What are we going to try and do here today to build a brighter future? Look at the word brighter. It means turning the lights up. It means being able to see better. And in terms of what I'm going to be talking about this morning, and what I hope carries on through the rest of the day, I want to see gender better for what it really is and can be. And that would be a really bright future, because the kids that are coming up the line now, they see gender very differently from the way, say, the Trump administration sees gender. Last week, the Trump administration called for gender to be defined by what's between your legs. That's a little scary. Never in the history of humanity has there ever been an enforceable, legalized definition of what's a man and what's a woman. And that's what the Trump administration is playing around with. They not only want a definition, they want to be able to enforce it. I heard that and I thought to myself, I could really use a brighter future around now. I wrote this piece for the Rolling Stone. And I called it, "The Gender Bullies Can't Win, and Here's Why." I was born in 1948, just under a year after Donald Trump was born. We both grew up in the 50s, back when it seemed like we all knew that America was great. World War II was over, and we won. The boys came back, they returned to work in the factories. The women, most of them stopped working in the factories and returned to their rightful places in the home, taking care of their men and the children. No one needed to define what made a man. It was obvious, his penis. No one needed to define what made a woman. It was obvious. She gave birth to children. Simple, obvious, unquestionable. Gender wasn't a word that anyone used other than biologists, and then only in conjunction with other words like species, phylum, and order. Sex was the word that everybody used back then. It was a word that included everything about what we now know about, oopsie. You can have fun with all kinds of technology. Sex was the word everyone used. It was a word that included everything we now know about what we refer to as gender. Assignment, identity, role, expression, attribution, and sexuality. As well as genitals, hormones, chromosomes, reproductive organs, and all their tissues and fluids. The word sex also included the understanding of the term secondary sex characteristics, which included beards, breasts, body hair, lack of body hair. The word sex included what we call sex drive. How bad do you want it? And when you wanted to talk about suitable work for men and appropriate work for women, you were talking about their sex roles. Sex was not a very precise word. And when you said sex, you meant all of the above. That's all you had to say was sex. Oh yeah, all of that. Gender, as we're using the word today, only really entered the mainstream use in the 1970s and 80s. Feminists were questioning the supremacy of sex as a factor in equality. A cultural wave was rising, and it was made up of more and more people who were not allowed to be called real men. Women, children, homosexuals, and any adult males who were not white and Christian. Now, they weren't real men, they were something other. And in the 70s and 80s, all the people who weren't real men were realizing they were being denied jobs, homes, rights, justice, and sexual pleasure. Keep in mind, please, this was back when America was great. The real cisgender men who controlled public spaces could deny access on a whim to women, children, homosexuals, and any adult males who were not white and Christian. Donald Trump and I grew up reading signs that said, "Men only," "No children allowed," "Whites only," "No Jews allowed." Donald and I, he in New York City, me down on the Jersey Shore, we'd ride our bikes past signs like that, and we would wonder about the day in the future when the world would finally treat us like real men. We were both in the process of developing a sexual identity. I saw my approaching manhood along the lines of Wile E. Coyote, frantically trying to come to a screeching stop before flying off the edge of a huge cliff. As far as I know, when Donald Trump dreamed of becoming a real man, it was a wet dream. And he was licking his lips with the anticipation of money and power. Donald and I were proving to our dads that we could be real men. Donald because he wanted with all his heart to be one, and me because I couldn't let my father see that I wasn't and never would be one. But the women, blacks, gays, lesbians, and radical youth were all at once raising their voices. It was a sexual revolution. The word gender was just spreading its wings in the academy. We needed a new word because the word sex had become overwhelming and seemed imbued with a God-given power of final arbitrarship. Right or wrong, sex. Good or evil, sex. Real men or real women, sex. And in response to all that black and white thinking, shades of gray were dawning. In response to all the answers that were prescribed and proscribed by sex, questions were whispered and spoken and shouted and moaned. We needed a new word for all that, a word that we could all figure out the definition of together. We took gender from its body-level roots in the field of biology and repurposed it. Gender began to mean body plus mind. Sex meant either or. Gender allowed for maybe something else. Now here's the kicker. All of the above, all of it, was taking place with no legal and binding definition of what's a man and what's a woman. It used to be everyone had their own idea of that, and that worked just fine. Up until now, there has not been a definition of men and women that's been encoded and enforced by law. So why is this happening now? Well, the people who want to enforce those definitions need to enforce them. Because no one in their right mind would see the sense of agreeing with those gender definitions without those laws. The unending struggles between men and women that emerged in the 20th century as the war between the sexes has morphed into the gender wars. That is, real, manly, cisgender men versus everybody they won't let be one. The sexual revolution that began in the 1960s worked as far as it could go. What we need now is a gender revolution. And there are a lot of people who could rise up together in resistance to the crazy idea of defining the rights of all Americans according to their genitals. Yes, we've been fragmented along the lines of not only gender, but also sexuality and race and age and class and religion and politics and so on. And while all those divisions are real and must be healed, we have the opportunity now to look past those differences and focus on what we have in common. All of us who are not permitted the rights, privileges, access, justice, and power afforded to straight, white, cisgender, real, manly men. The first thing to keep in mind is that there are more of us than there are of them. Relatively few people in the world are allowed to call themselves real, manly, cisgender men. So it's time for the rest of us to find and hold some common ground. Women have got a great deal in common with gays, lesbians, bisexuals, asexuals, intersex, and transgender people who've got a lot in common with queer, non-binary, and gender non-conforming people who've got a lot in common with children and older youth. Sissy men and young boys have a lot in common with men of color. People with disabilities, physical and mental alike, have traditionally been denied membership in any gender in the America that once was great. Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, Wiccans, and atheists stand alongside the ranks of intellectuals, the effete, as well as the nerds, the geeks, and the town fools. In short, we are a whole lot of people. And all we have to do to stop the gender bullies from getting away with it, the only thing we have to do is stop thinking that our own unique gender-based suffering is worse than anyone else's. Everyone experiences their own suffering as the worst. And once we let go of our gendered importance, we can begin to cooperate with others who are being targeted by the gender bullies. Then we agree to look after the most vulnerable among us, whomever we triage them to be. We cooperate, compromise, form coalitions, and we vote. Voila. End of gender bullies in power. It's not going to be easy. It may take a while. So we keep resisting. I'm 70 years old and I have been resisting gender bullying from the day I was told I had to be a boy. I'm still alive and joyously living the non-binary gender of my choice. And we can all do that, the gender of our choice, if we do it together with the kindness, compassion, and justice we all deserve. Thank you. Thank you. Resisting gender bullying with a kind heart takes a lot of practice. And it takes a lot of practice to welcome into your heart other people who live their lives differently to yours. The good news is there's a real easy way to practice that. And I'm going to start with a little Zen Buddhism at this point. There's an old Zen saying. Very simple saying. It's a teaching parable, really, called a koan, K-O-A-N. A Zen koan is like a Christian parable, except the koan usually has no beginning or middle or end, and it has no lesson. But it's just like a parable other than that. The koan I have been working on for 30 years, and it hasn't let me down yet, is this. The way you do anything is the way you do everything. The whole koan. The way you do anything is the way you do everything. So, if that's true, then if I want an ice cream cone and I'm like 8, 9 years old and I don't know how to get one, but I figure it out, well, the steps I take to figure out how to get an ice cream cone and actually get it are going to be very similar to the steps I'm going to take next time when I want something and don't know how to get it. More to the point, if the way you do anything is the way you do everything, then theoretically, everything you do mindfully, consciously, is a good rehearsal for everything else you're going to do mindfully and consciously. You'll just get better and better at it. So, a more solid definition, example of that. We're used to defining gender by bodies or referencing bodies. But we can also use geometry to define gender. Here's how that works. We shine a brighter light on it, and we see that gender started out, indeed, like this young man and I found with, old Fred out in front of the cave going, "Hey, look!" So there were two. Gender is based on an axis of two. Male and female, masculine and feminine, men and women. Knowing geometry, when you have two dimensions, that forms a plane, a flat surface. And that's how we've been looking at gender all up until the 1970s or 80s when we were calling it sex. Body-based. Gender's always been body-based. Of course. Of course. Duh. Yes. The nice thing about a plane is that if you really get smart, you can describe a spectrum. You can go, well, from male to female, from masculine to feminine, from less feminine to more feminine, from less masculine to more. You can describe all kinds of spectrums on a plane. But gender exists in more dimensions than two. And what we've been doing over the last 30 or 40 years has been entering the dimension of mind, the third dimension of gender. Mind. So you've got the plane, and all of a sudden, you've increased the space with which you can look at gender. Mind includes wonderful things like imagination. And with imagination, we get gender nonconforming people. We get gender non-binary people. We get people who are agender, no gender at all. Everybody is tied to, still, the first two dimensions, eventually. But now we've got mind and body. But it doesn't stop there. Gender has a fourth dimension, and that's time. Gender is constantly moving through time. The gender you are now is not the gender you were 3 years ago. You've changed. A lot of gender suffering comes about from resisting the change. Oh no, I'm losing it. Oh no, I'm going past my prime. A lot of gender suffering is, I'm not old enough to be a man yet. I'm not old enough to be a woman yet. Time. And then when we finally get to the point where we see, aha, now I'm a man. And then, oh my gosh, I'm drifting into being an old man. Time. My gender isn't what you see before you. My gender isn't what I just told you it is. My gender is 70 years of experience. I can't tell you all that in 1 or 2 words, but that's my gender. In quantum mechanics, quantum phenomena, itty bitty, smaller than atoms, phenomena may exist as particles or waves. Normally they're waves, they're in constant motion. Until you look at it, measure it, and locate it. And then it's a particle. A photon, smaller than an atom, it's what light is a wave until you look at it, and then it's a particle. Same with gender. It's a continuum until you go, oh, that's a man. I got it. Yeah, that's a man. I look away, and goodness knows what that person has become, or is becoming, or is headed toward. Now, what's the value of this? The value of this is maybe we can stop some gender-based suffering by looking at gender in another way. I mentioned a few ways we suffer gender by not acknowledging the passage of time. I'm not old enough, or I'm too old. Well, with a lot of work, you can accept time into gender. That's what I've done. Being very old. You know how old people get shorter? Right? They shrink. I've shrunk. I've shrunk 4 inches. I used to walk around the world. I was almost 6 feet tall. I'm now just under 5'8". So for me, that's little. And I'm old. And it's always been my aim to be a lady. This is what my mother was. She set a good example for me. It's a way of being gracious in the world that I really admire. So I'm little, I'm old, I'm a lady, I'm a little old lady. I am. And who knew that I could ever be one of those? I get to get on the subway, and say, excuse me, dear, could I have your seat, please? That is great. It is great. I say, oh, young man, you look particularly handsome today. You should know. You get to say stuff like that. You get to walk through the world a whole other way if you embrace the time of gender. All right. So that's one way of shining a light on gender. Back to the idea of suffering. Well, let's see. There are more ways we can just shine a light on gender. Look at gender a little bit differently. You've heard me talk about non-binary, and people talk about the binary gender system. Back when I was first writing about this in 1989, that wasn't a word we used. I used to call it the bipolar gender system, which was accurate in its own way. But looking at the nature of a binary, please do this. Imagine a circle, big circle. Everything we know about gender is inside that circle. Masculinity, femininity, misogyny, ladies, gentlemen, butches, femmes, boys, girls. Everything we know about gender is inside that circle. Nothing's outside the circle at all. I put a line right down the middle, and everything inside the circle has to be on one side or the other. And these sides are equal and opposite. Everything on this side is equal and opposite to everything on this side. Theoretically, that's a binary. It has rules. You can't be outside the circle. You can't move to the other side. Neither side is complete in and of itself. It needs stuff from the other side to be complete. But every time you reach across that divide to get, I'm going to get some of that, and then we'll be more equal. I'm going to get some of that, and we'll be more equal. Every time you do that, it's seen as an attack. That's because the nature of a binary is the nature of a battlefield. There's no room for compromise. There's no room for coalition. The only activism that you can have in a binary is essentially warfare. So, of course, we have the war between the sexes. In binary politics, it's the same damn thing. No compromise. Nuh-uh. No coalition. Nope. My side against yours. That's a binary. That's the nature of a binary. The way you bust up a binary is by questioning it and showing an irrefutable third, something that exists outside the notions of one side or the other. Boom! That line disappears. Everything is scrambling up because the circle still exists. Gender still exists. By breaking the binary of gender, you're not destroying gender. You're destroying the way it's manifesting in the world. And once you do that, once you take away the dividing line, you no longer have a binary, you have a polynary. It's a real word. Polynary, polynary. A binary is any phenomenon composed of two and two only parts. A polynary is any phenomenon composed of more than two parts. More than two. So inside the polynary of gender, you've got the binary of men and women. That's a very real binary. Yes, it exists. Alongside the binary of boys and girls. Alongside many spectrums, alongside gender as a spiral, alongside gender as a three-dimensional mirror ball. Any way you want to look at gender can exist in there. And because there's more room in there, there's more possibility for compromise and coalition and cooperation. The nature of a polynary is the nature of a playground. The activism of a polynary is the activism of cooperation, compromise, and coalition. That's possible. That's a way to shine a light on gender to make a brighter future of people dealing with gender beyond the binary. But that's not what's happening in today's LGBTQIA, etc. world. People are at war with one another with who's really trans. You know, who's trans enough to be called transgender? This I find disheartening. But if we shine a light on it, if we make things a little brighter, a solution reveals. I'm a big fan of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I live in New York City, and he comes to talk every 4 or 5 years. And I go see him at the Beacon Theater. Meatloaf plays there too. Never on stage together, but that would be a hell of a good thing. The last talk I heard the Dalai Lama give had this amazing title: Profound Wisdom and Vast Compassion, the Essence of Eloquence. I want to write stuff with titles like that. I don't. I write, A Queer and Pleasant Danger, Waka Waka. Profound wisdom and vast compassion, the essence of eloquence. In Tibetan Buddhism, Mahayana Buddhism, the definition of eloquence is this: the telling of a truth in such a way that it eases suffering. In order to do that, you need to be wise. You need to have compassion. The more suffering that is eased by your telling of a truth, the more eloquent you've been. In order to parse this, Mahayana Buddhists say that in day-to-day life, not on any kind of spiritual or profound level, but day-to-day life, there's two kinds of truths. There's definitive truth and there's arguable truth. Definitive truth, there's not too many of them. They're usually very easily stated, and you can't argue them. Everyone dies. You can't argue that one. There's another one. Nobody knows what time they're going to die. Even people who commit suicide, they don't know the exact moment of their death. They can set it in motion, but they don't know the exact moment. Nobody knows the exact moment of your death. There's another definitive truth. Arguable truths, boy, there's a lot of those. And it usually takes a little bit longer to explain those. Pizza is the perfect food. Oh, really, it is. Look at it. It's got tomatoes, it's got cheese, it's got bread, it's got everything you need. And look, if you want to put meat on it, you can put meat on it. If you want to be a vegan, you can do that veganly. You can even do it gluten-free. And it tastes great. You got to admit that. Everybody loves the taste of pizza, some one way or another. So pizza is the perfect food, and that's the truth. Arguably. So I'm sitting there. He didn't give those examples. I'm sitting there, and the Dalai Lama's talking. I'm going, is there a definitive truth of gender that everyone would have to agree on, however grudgingly, and see that their own truth of gender that they've been holding on to is arguable, even though it eases their suffering to believe in it? And I found it. I found the damn definitive truth of gender. My book will be coming out in about 1.5 years. And you can find it out then. Yeah. The definitive truth of gender is very easily said. There's two ways of saying it, the simple way and the academic way. The simple definitive truth of gender is relative. The academic way is gender is relative to context and point of view. As soon as you argue it, you prove it. Lots of arguable truths of gender. Gender is two and two only. Let's face it. No, really. Gender is two and two only. It always has been. And it's worked just fine. Penises and vaginas, if you want to put it that way. There's lots of body weight bases that you can say gender is two. But that works. And it is the basis for sexuality. You base your sexuality on the gender of the person you're attracted to in relation to your own gender. And that's the truth. Arguably. Gender is anything you want it to be. Gender is not only fluid, it can be multiple. You can be 6 or 7 genders at the same time. You can be one. You can be none. You can have fun with gender. You can treat gender very seriously. And gender can be a factor in your desire, but it doesn't have to be. There's lots of other ways to measure your desire and your sexuality than gender. You can measure it by what do you actually do if you're doing anything, because asexuality is a valid sexual orientation. So gender is a lot, and that's the truth. Arguably. If the definitive truth of gender is that it's relative to context and point of view, how might that help you in your work with your kids that are coming to you for help? I don't know. But it is going to make a brighter future, because people are going to be able to choose their arguable truth of gender according to what eases their suffering and affords them some happiness. And that's what the arguable truth of gender boils down to. Everyone's got a right to their arguable truth of gender. No one has a right to enforce their arguable truth of gender on anywhere else. That's where you resist. Lastly, the brighter truth of gender, the brighter future of gender, is fun. I'm working on this book now, Trans, just for the fun of it. And because the title has already gotten me in trouble, I've given it a snappy subtitle that eases the bite of the title. Compassionate Gender Strategies for Divisive Times. The brighter future of gender is fun. If you're going to go through all this work with gender, and even people who are cisgender are consciously or unconsciously doing a whole lot of work to maintain their genders, you might as well have fun with it. There's all kinds of ways to have fun with gender. The worst way, and I hope you don't ever do this, is having fun at someone else's expense. I don't think anyone in this room consciously does that. You can have fun with gender as a source of self-delight. You can have fun with gender being a source of delight for other people. You can have fun with gender debating what is going to ease the suffering of the most people, how you can be most eloquent with your living and experiencing of gender. That's a lot of fun. You can fall in love. Gender is a big component in that. That's having fun with gender. All of those ways of having fun with gender, and that's only a few of them, pass. They're all a phase, including the falling in love part. Sorry. But there is one way of having fun with gender that stays with you your whole life, never fades. figuring out a way to use your gender in such a way that it eases someone else's suffering. That never leaves you. You go, okay, good. And you move on. You don't say, oh, I'm so proud I just did that, and sit there. No, because time. But you feel good. And so do the people whose suffering you've eased. So, I'd like you to have a wonderful conference today. Creating a brighter future, seeing what gender really is, and how to help people live their genders eloquently by telling their genders in such a way to ease suffering. Argue gender eloquently, please, and always look for common ground. You're going to hear things today that you totally disagree with. Look for the common ground, please. I'm here for the rest of the day, so let's catch up and talk if we can. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you.